Do not despise what God had given you at conception. We tend to think life begins at birth, and many legal people think that's the case, but life begins at conception. And the things that make us happy and satisfied in life vary from person to person, and affects the way we value things in life, whether they are material or spiritual things. So these are the two themes in the verse that I have chosen to be the focus verse for this sermon, verse 34. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank, and rose and went away. Thus Esau despised his birthright. But let us leave those themes for now. We'll come back to them. Let us recap the story of this family, which is the context of the reading and verse 34. When you read, we kind of skip a part of the reading. And it seems like the narrator also in a hurry to tell this story of this family that God has chosen to be the bearer of his blessing and the promise, salvation of the world. Last week we had Isaac marrying his niece. Rebecca was his niece, because the grandson of Nahor, his uncle. This brought some comfort to Isaac after the passing of his mother, but also provide hope for the promise and the blessing. And after that, there's a short mention of Abraham marrying Keturah. Not many people know that Abraham married again after Sarah was passed away, but he married Keturah, and they had six sons. And there is a short mention of the passing of Abraham, and then a mention of Ishmael's sons, families. Not many people know about that, and because of the way the story is being told. In fact, even poor Isaac, it's like he's been used as a stepping stone from the past to the real story, the story of Jacob, who will become Israel and whose sons will form the basis of the 12 tribes of Israel. The story of Jacob, even though Esau is there, but really this is the story about Jacob, because he's going to be the bearer of that promise and the blessing. More than half of Genesis is devoted to telling this story, because from now on, right to the end in chapter 50, it's all about Jacob's family. There are characters, other people in the story, but they are there just to help move the story. And it is appropriate that this story starts with the birth of Jacob and his twin brother Esau. Now, I do not know whether the narrator understood the biology that we now know, because it seems like the plot is deliberately made to confuse the reader, because it says Jacob and Esau were fraternal twins. People usually don't pay to that, fraternal twins, pay attention to that. And they also say Esau was robust compared to Jacob. But that statement is not consistent with real life facts. Fraternal multiple births in humans is rare, so we have to look for insight into animals where multiple birth is common. Fortunately, in my earlier life, in my second undergraduate, I specialized in molecular biology and genetics. And in the final 2 years of that program, I studied the genetics and reproduction of pigs for 2 years for my honors thesis. And this is what I found. Conception takes place, there are 2 days within the sow or the female pig is able to conceive. And conception can take place with any time that 2 days. And the fertilized eggs, they are stacked like sausages in sacks and then lined up in the placenta. The first one closer to the body or the connection with the body of the sow. The last one to be conceived is farther away, closer to the birth canal. So during birth, it is this last pig to be conceived that will come out first. And it is always the tiniest piglet of the litter. And we call it, does anyone know the name? The runt. Yeah, the runt. And it makes sense that it has to be the runt to be born first because the birth canal is still fairly closed. It will be really hard for the bigger piglets to come out first. It has to be the smaller one. Because the runt will find it easy to get through the birth canal, open it a bit, so that the bigger ones, right at the end, can come out. So they come in order, no, first one until the last one, which is the first one to be conceived in fraternal twins. Now, we are biologically the same as animals, especially the higher animals. We suggest the inside, this tells us that Jacob, who was born last, was the first one to be conceived. And he also would have been bigger than Esau. You've seen in one of the slides, the twin. The one on the top is bigger than the one at the bottom, closer to the birth canal. Now, I have seen, and also, so the last born, because they are well nourished, they will have a better chance of surviving. The runt, often without the help of people, they do not last very long. And in nature, they often die. Now, I've seen many fraternal same-sex twins, and that is what you'll see. The last-born is always like bigger and robust compared to the first-born. Now, the famous war cricketing twins, Mark and Steve. So Steve was the first-born, and Mark is called Junior because he was the last-born. I've seen a photo of the twin when they were teenagers, and Mark was much bigger, robust, while Steve was kind of a skinny one. And we saw this even when they were playing cricket. And I don't know how many people watch cricket, but you can see Steve kind of was, really struggled to be a good cricketer, whereas Mark seems like he was just natural. He does not have to move his hands a lot. He just flicks the bat and the ball runs to the boundary. So those are biological facts that are a little bit inconsistent with what we read in this story. The scientific facts that I'm sharing call to question the notion that Esau was older because he was born first, and Jacob was younger because he was born last. It also called to question the notion that life begins at birth, it begins at conception. And also the information there says that Esau was robust, more robust than Jacob. I don't think that would have been the case, because I don't think you will find any medical evidence of that. The last one is always the stronger of fraternal twins. Now, when assigning, because this was the culture of that place at that time. So the firstborn will usually get the blessing of the family and much more of any wealth that is left. So assigning birthright is a lot easier when they are born different times. But when it comes to fraternal twins, it's a little bit tricky, because as I've just shared with you, the lastborn would have been the first one to be conceived. The firstborn would be in the last. And you see this story also coming up in the story in, I think, Genesis 38, the twins of Tamar and Judah. Perez and Sarah. So apparently Sarah put out his hand first, and then the midwife says, he is the oldest. And then it so happened Sarah was the last one to be born. Now with that confusion hopefully resolved, we can return to the trade between Esau and Jacob, where Esau sold his birthright to Jacob. Now I have read many commentaries about this story, and I have not seen one where Jacob comes out in a nice light. People have said all kinds of names, calls him names, you name it. They have used them to describe Jacob, a terrible person. What about Esau? We rarely talk about Esau. It's like all the attention is on Jacob. But what about Esau? Is he any good? Well, this story tells us what Esau is like. He is very hungry. Jacob makes an offer, a bowl of lentil for his birthright. And he says, oh, I'm about to die. What use is that birthright? Yeah, that's what he said. What use is that birthright to me? He forget that this birthright is not just for him. It is for his family, and it's for the promise made to his grandfather. Now, since we are talking about human culture and not what God is doing, this is what Esau's birthright was worth. He would have inherited a farm. He would have pocketed 2/3 of Isaac's wealth, if there's any left. He would become the family patriarch, and he will receive the always coveted patriarch or father's blessing. But more importantly, he would be the bearer of the blessing and the promise of God. In this family, the whole world would be blessed. That is what he was going to be responsible for. But Esau said, no, my stomach is more important. No, please, anyone can have that. There is no way he would have died. No way. But his stomach was more important to him, more important than his future, more important than the future of his family, more important than the future of Israel, and more importantly, the promise made to his grandfather. Now the question is that the kind of person you would like to look after your super? No. Or maybe some people say, maybe. But certainly, God cannot risk the promise and the blessing on a person who only thinks about his stomach. You see, Jacob would have known the behavior of his brother, because it is very likely that he's been doing this for many times. He would have gone hunting, expecting to come home, and Jacob is cooking, and Jacob will give him a free feed. But Jacob has grown up, become a businessman, and now, let's make a deal, Esau. Give me your birthright. It was a very astute decision by Jacob. Now, some have accused Jacob of taking advantage of Esau's vulnerability. But that is using our values to judge the culture of that time, 4,000 years ago. Different country, different culture. It's very, very easy for people to become patronizing, judging others from their own perspective. And moreover, people are still doing what Jacob did. There are buyers of houses. They wait until the seller is desperate so they can get a good deal. So we cannot just accuse Jacob. We have to look at what people are doing nowadays. So we need to be careful when we judge others according to our value. Now, I did not write this story, the story of Jacob. God did. Or the people who were listening to God wrote this story. God will have known from conception the person who should inherit the promise. But when he spoke to Rebekah, he was speaking the language that people understood. When he said, the elder, that means Esau, will save the younger, that means Jacob. But of course, God knows who was the one responsible who was going to be responsible for the promise and the blessing. And this is the thing about this story. It gets people riled and upset, but God is just doing what God has to do. The characters in the drama are just playing their parts, and God is asking us, can you see salvation in this story? Can we find salvation in a story of a dysfunctional family? Some will struggle to find salvation in this story. But believe me, in the chaos of Isaac's family, you can find salvation. The story is packed with salvation because it ends with this celebration. And these are some of the take-home we can get from this story. First, God is calling us to play our part in advancing this story. That's why we are here. We're supposed to reflect the light of Christ into the world. So that is one thing that we have to pay attention to. Find out where God wants us to participate in this salvation story. Second, life can be very long, and so is our faith journey. Avoid being seduced by instant gratification. Instead, be patient and trust God. Third, and related to the second, be careful with those who wait for you to become vulnerable so they can take advantage of you, because there are many people out there. Fourth, if your family looks like this family, then you have hope. There is hope. There is always hope with God. I invite you to submerge yourself in this story. Try and meditate on this story. When you do, you will be able to see the redeeming features of your family that you cannot see, because you're not seeing it with the redemptive eyes of Christ. And finally, do not despise what God has given you at conception. I believe that everything we have later on in life, we would have been given right there at conception. Value them regardless of what you got. Even something that is negative, we can always turn it to a positive when we seek the guidance of God and trust God processes that we can make it good. In fact, even the despised Roman cross became the basis of our salvation. And we will be celebrating that in a short while. And as we've done that, remember that this story goes all the way back to the story that we heard this morning about Jacob and Esau. For the glory of God, amen.